All right, so we're going to talk about understanding and responding to dementia-related behaviors. And the goals of our topic today, we're going to identify common triggers for behaviors associated with dementia, explain the process for assessing and identifying challenging behaviors, as well as talk about strategies to address some of the more common related behaviors. So as we go along, feel free to type your questions into the chat box. We'll answer. We'll try and stop periodically to see if there's any questions along the way. Um, First, let's talk a little bit about what is Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's falls under the umbrella category of dementia. Alzheimer's is the most common, affecting about 60 to 80% of all people diagnosed with dementia. So it causes changes, as we may know, with memory, with thinking, and behavior. Those are the common hallmark signs associated with the disease. I cannot stress enough that it's not a normal part of aging. And there's a lot of variability among symptoms between individuals. Symptoms that appear, when they appear, how long it takes a individual to progress through the disease, highly variable in nature. What happens with Alzheimer's disease is in our brain, we have 86 billion neurons or nerve cells, and they talk to each other by sending electrical signals. So, all day long, sending and receiving these signals. I like to think of it as a highway. So, pieces of information that are important to you, you use them frequently, you've known them for a very long time. Those are that pathway between those two pieces of information is like an 8-lane superhighway. This would be like, think about your birthday, where you grew up, close friends' names, information like that. And then we have other information where it's not as frequent as we use it, or it's not important in the long run. And those pieces of information are more connected through, think of it like a dirt path. And that might be what you had for breakfast 3 days ago. Not highly important for our day to day life moving forward. So we have all of those different types of roads going on, connecting all of our pieces of information in our brain. When we have Alzheimer's, we get the development of what we call plaques and tangles. And plaques are like clumps of protein fragments, and tangles are a different protein fragment, but they're longer and more strand-like, and they tangle up. So these plaques and tangles, they clog up our highway. Think of it kind of like suddenly it's road construction. And if enough obstruction is on that pathway, those two cells can't talk to each other anymore, or not as well. And then if we start to have that, oh, what's that word again? Or why did I come into this room? Those issues. What our brain tries to do, just like when we experience construction, is find a detour, try and find a different pathway to connect to that piece of information that we're looking for. Sometimes we can, it takes a little bit. Sometimes, like when we take a detour, we may end up completely lost from where we want to be. Happens. But if enough time goes by that the that neuron, that nerve cell isn't connecting with anybody else, it's going to die off. That's the brain's way to, the brain is trying to keep it as efficient as possible, to not waste resources where parts of the brain are not being used. Sounds crazy. But so that brain cell dies off. If enough brain cells in a particular part of the brain occur, we start seeing permanent changes in whatever area that brain was responsible for. So whether it's with Alzheimer's, we see it most often focused in the hippocampus, where the memory center is. So memory, thinking, problem solving, sometimes emotion regulation and behavior are some of the things that we see. All right. Change our slide here. Okay. So when we talk about behaviors, understand that behavior is a form of communication. And through the progression of Alzheimer's disease, starting in that middle stage, that middle to late stage, this is where we typically see a bulk of our behavioral responses starting to occur. And it can be at times frustrating as caregivers to figure out what's going on. When you think about long term with the disease, our people with Alzheimer's, they start at the beginning and they have nice, long, complex sentences and rich vocabulary. And then as they progress through the disease, those sentences become shorter, the vocabulary becomes more basic, the idea in those sentences becomes more simplistic. Right. And they start to rely more and more on body language, facial expressions, gestures to communicate their needs with other people. Right. Behaviors can be triggered by a lot of different things. Most commonly are physical discomfort, fatigue, hunger, thirst, constipation, needing to use the bathroom, feeling too hot or too cold. Behaviors can also be triggered by being overstimulated, too much going on at one time, as well as the opposite. There's just nothing going on right now, and I'm feeling bored. Uh, Sadness, loss can be another one, as well as just changes to a daily routine or a living situation. Just having um, just that big change of what was expecting or what's happening day to day can be enough to help trigger some behaviors. And it's definitely challenging at times to sort out the reason behind the behavior that we're seeing. So we're going to talk these next couple slides, we're going to talk more about what those behaviors are, how to come up with a strategy to manage them. But keep in mind that when we talk of behaviors, they can vary widely in appearance, but it is a form of communicating. They're trying to tell you something. Most commonly, these behaviors are going to take the appearance of repetition. We've all been there with the repeating the same story or the same question or the same sentence. Agitation, aggression, hallucinations, delusions, and sundowning. Being all in the medical profession, I'm sure with sundowning, but if you're not familiar, towards as the day goes on into the afternoon and evening, it's pretty common to see more of these different types of behaviors taking place because of I've spent all day trying to figure out this world and I'm tired versus maybe I'm getting my days and nights mixed up and I'm not sleeping so well. And I don't have the mental and physical capacities to regulate my behavior anymore. So they're starting to pop up. I'm getting agitated, irritated. I'm starting to see things that are not there. Right. So as we understand and address behaviors, there's four strategies that we keep in mind to help minimize their appearance and their effect on day-to-day life. So we're going to spend time talking about how to detect and connect, addressing physical needs, addressing emotional needs, and how to reassess and plan for next time. So we're going to start with detect and connect. And this one, I mean, it's a lot like the way it sounds. We're detecting that behaviors are occurring or potentially getting ready to connect to occur and making an attempt to connect with that individual to see if we can't either um, redirect away from that behavior occurring altogether, or if it is occurring, can we minimize, ease, find a resolution to that behavior? So, either way, a big part of this is finding where that person is in reality because of the changes that occur in the brain. Disorientation is very common in the disease, and they're very likely not to be living in the 2022 world, but more likely to be living somewhere along the past in their life. Typically, you'll see them talk about parents being alive, or the children still live at home or need to get to school, or the individual themselves has a job and they need to get there before they're late. Some sort, kind of going back to where they may have had a more active day-to-day role. Right. And we can't expect them to come back to 2022, especially when they are already struggling so much to interact and connect with our world. So it's upon the caregiver to find out where that person is, and be there with them. And sometimes we just can't. We don't know where they are in this moment. They're just kind of have that lost feeling, lost look, or they can't offer you any clue as to where they are mentally. Right. So this is where you need to put on your detective hat, and maybe we can find some answers that way. uh, Most often, a behavior or behavior trigger is often influenced by the events leading up to that. So think back, was there something different about making breakfast that day that suddenly changed that person's demeanor or behavior or what have you? Was it during an afternoon walk? Was it when an old friend visited and the topic of conversation was emotional for the patient? Having having those sort of clues can help guide you on where they might be experiencing that discomfort, or what they might be trying to communicate with you. When you are trying to connect with the individual, you want to keep your demeanor calm. You want to be approachable, you know, soft voices. Maybe you're using their name. Maybe, depending on the person, maybe it's a hand to hand, some sort of gentle physical contact, letting them know that somebody is here. That's very person specific, but it may be a beneficial tactic. Just giving somebody an anchor to this world. So keep it approachable, keep it calm. We're not accusing anything. We're just trying to let that person know that you're here, you're trying to listen, you're trying to help. Right. Having eye contact can help, and being in front of the person can help as well. And in the later stages of dementia, our field of vision rapidly becomes narrow. So in healthy adults, we have very nice peripheral vision, but as we progress through Alzheimer's in the late stages, we're talking 6 inches field of vision. So when you try to approach somebody from the side, you can see them from far away, but to them, it's like nobody. Then all of a sudden, there's a person here in my face, and you can see how startling that can be, and that can trigger behavior. So when possible, try to approach from the front, call their name, get their eye contact if possible, to help with that connection. Um, the person is more likely to respond to your body language and the tone of your voice than the actual words that you're saying. Okay? Right. So once we've made that connection, they know that you're here to help, or some change is going to happen. Take a look at what physical needs need to be met. Again, this might go back to some detective work on your part, but a lot of the behaviors that we see typically have a physical component hiding behind it. This may be something as simple as feeling hungry or being thirsty, needing to use the restroom, or even a change of clothes, whether it's because we had an accident, or I've worked with individuals who were very meticulous about their clothing, and any little tiny spill or perceived spill required a new change in outfit. So it may you may have to go with the flow with what they're indicating or asking. It may also be time for pain medication if there's other comorbidities, or a recent, say like a recent fall that happened. Okay. Um, After taking a look on the body, take a look at the environment. Is there too much light, not enough light? Getting into summer season now, is there too much loud outdoor noise from the lawnmower? Something like that going on. Is it too hot or too cold? All of those factors have a influence on personal comfort. And when we're not feeling comfortable, we feel irritated, we have a shorter temper, we're not as um, flexible with our daily changes that might happen to our schedule, right? Even think about the people that may be visiting or living in the home. Well, sometimes there's just too much going on. Think about at Christmas time, when a lot of families tend to gather together. There may be a lot of new people. The volume of the house may be increased because suddenly a lot more people are talking. May need to plan in quiet breaks, where or creating a space where that individual can just kind of take that moment to catch their breath, recollect, have some of that downtime to relax, get back to their equilibrium. Okay. And then another point to keep in mind, going back a little to the physical, is looking for any recent injuries, looking for things that may not be fitting well, like dentures who no longer fit well, so we're creating sore spots. Or if they wear a medical brace of some sort, does it still fit the way that they should, or are we getting skin irritations? Is there arthritis acting up? Or could they be developing an illness such as a bladder infection? We start to see those signs leading up to it. But if you do see a sudden rapid change in a medical condition, you want to consult the physician, because that's not a um, it's not a characteristic of Alzheimer's disease. That sudden rapid change in medical condition is usually contributed to something else going on in their medical picture, and it's worth letting the physician know. Right. And being lastly, I would say be understanding that they, as that individual may recognize that something is not right, they may lack those skills, and likely they do lack those skills to tell you where the discomfort is. How does it feel? Is it a dull, nagging pain? Is it a sharp lightning bolt pain? Does it come and go? And what is the cause for it? So there's a lot to go on to try and figure out, ask questions, or watch that facial expression, that body language, to help you gather clues to what may be going on. Right. And after we have our physical needs, we take a look at emotional needs. And these are a little harder to assess because we can't see emotions. We have to use all of those little clues to help us figure out what's going on. Right. So in this one, it's worth considering how that individual feels with the situation that's going on. And instead of focusing on the words that are used or the actions taking place, think about the emotion that may be hiding behind it. So I hear often the repetition of, this is not my home, I want to go home. It's a pretty common one. When instead of focusing on, well, you can't go home, this is not your home, or you don't have a home, you live here, recognize that we're not really talking about physically trying to leave home. We're more trying to get somebody to understand that I'm feeling homesick, that I'm sad, I'm lonely, and I want somebody else to know that I'm feeling that way. I want some help to resolve that feeling that I'm having. So this is where it takes some time, some thinking to figure out what the person is trying to say when they can't say it. Right. And this is definitely a learning curve. It takes a lot of practice. And as caregivers, we don't always get it right. And I think it's important to give grace to ourselves in those situations and know that we are trying to do the best because it's challenging at these times. You're picking up on that feeling underneath, what, maybe relate that back to events that you know about in that person's life. Maybe it's sharing or reminding of cherished memories that they have or events that took place there. So we're finding a way to acknowledge the situation, acknowledge that they're feeling homesick and sorry, uh, not sorry, sorrowful or sad, and redirecting. So recognizing it and redirecting to a different activity to minimize the period of that behavior that we see. Okay. Keep in mind when we talk about memories, or reminisce, which is a fantastic activity for people with Alzheimer's disease. We don't want to turn the reminiscing into a pop quiz. So we want to avoid questions of, do you remember who was here? Do you remember this picture? Do you remember what was? It feels like a bit of the third degree. And as humans, we try to avoid that, and we tend to shut down. That may lead to more behaviors because it's not a feeling that I want. It's not a situation I'm feeling most comfortable in. So I generally encourage caregivers and loved ones when they're reminiscing and sharing memories to talk about their experience about it from their perspective, and allow that person with Alzheimer's disease to join in when they're able, as they're able to. So instead of saying, do you remember where we took this picture from? We can approach it as, oh, I remember taking this picture in Arizona. We went out to the Grand Canyon and had a picnic, and oh, the weather was just so lovely. And letting them, so there's no pressure on that individual to come up with dates, facts, figures. They can acknowledge that memory. It might lead them to add their own spark to it, or they just may comment on, yeah, picnics are really fun, or I like doing vacation. So that's a way to connect with that person without placing conversation burden on them. Right? And that once you have that line of communication open with them, it becomes a lot easier to redirect any behaviors that need to be redirected to a more appropriate activity. And bringing into this next topic goes really well with that emotional connection is the idea of validation and orientation. Orientation for a while used to be the preferred approach. Orientation is consistently and frequently reminding that individual where they are, why they're there, what they can or cannot do. So constantly, in today's context, it would be constantly bringing that person back to 2022, back to acknowledging that the parents have moved passed on, that they no longer work, that the children don't go to school anymore. Right? Versus today, we take a more validation approach, and we encourage others to use that too, where we recognize what they're saying, recognize the sentiment in that saying, and connect emotionally with them on how they may feel about not having to work anymore, or like if we're insisting that it's 10 o'clock, I need to get to work, I'm going to get to work, and instead of saying we don't work anymore, recognizing that, you're feeling like you need to get on something, need to move and get active, work. I have that feeling too. I remember starting my first job, and we're changing that conversation, redirecting away from there. I need to leave, I'm going to be late. Right? This comes from with validation. We avoid the arguing, insisting that it is 2020 and not 1956. Acknowledge that, okay, we can live in 1956 right now. Tell me more about your work. Get them engaged in whatever kind of conversation or activity, or can they gesture their job to you? Mirror their vocabulary. That helps to connect with people. So if they're using specific words or particular words, use them back in your responses. Having those approachable, open questions that tell me more, or if I've always wanted to learn more about that can help with that shift in thinking, because an individual can now recognize that you're there to help, you're not a threat, that they're in a safe environment. Right? We talk about that. And last thing we need to do is, after that situation has occurred, that behavior, we've calmed them down as best we can, we've redirected, take some time to assess what worked, what didn't work, and how to anticipate and plan for that behavior in the future. Because there's no cure for Alzheimer's. We know that we're going to see these behaviors pop up. It is never a one and done. And we also know that what worked today may not work later on today or even tomorrow. So it's nice to have a variety of techniques and a variety of strategies to call upon when something's not working as we had hoped or anticipated to. Right. So this starts with going all the way back to the beginning to see if you can identify what triggered this behavior to start with, what event. As you do this each time, hopefully you're going to be able to see a pattern. Like we know that current events, or a certain place, or a certain person, or a certain daily activity is going to really increase our chances for a behavior, right? What can we do to minimize that response to what needs to happen? Okay. And that might be using different vocabulary, maybe moving that event or person to a different time of day if possible, different setup to how the activity is completed. If it's an activity, if it's certain topics, how do we phrase it, word it? Do we not talk about it and change in something different instead? Be having an honest assessment about what could change, what didn't work compared to the time before, or the response to the change that you had. Right? This is where you get some creativity going on. Excuse me. Can we change a caregiver or a different item in that activity? Can we rearrange to maybe have a if we know an activity that is consistently soothing to that patient, or it really brings down their anxiety or physicality, maybe we do that activity before we get to an activity that maybe causes a little more of these behaviors. Um, that can help minimizing how long that behavior takes place if the activity takes place. There's a lot of free reign in here, and I think sometimes this is where support groups can really be helpful for caregivers, so they can always discuss what kind of behaviors are they seeing, what have they tried in the past, and we all benefit from each other's knowledge. Right? This is an ongoing process. Then we will always be reevaluating, reassessing, because we want to really minimize and head off those behaviors when we can. Uh, right. And lastly, when we talk about this, I know when we went through the order, we talked about connect and detect and physical needs and then emotional needs. Sometimes we need to think about the order of how we assess needs. So sometimes before we can assess for physical needs like hunger, thirst, bathroom, we need to take care of some emotional needs that's going on just to get to that space where the individual is receptive to what you're trying to suggest or to happen or to understand what's happening. Right? Before we go on into reducing behaviors, are there any questions up until this point? Mm, Perfect. All right. Well, let's talk about reducing behaviors. I know we've kind of thrown in snippets here and there along the way. Um, Anxiety and agitation can take place, can appear when there's restlessness, can appear as like restlessness, pacing, distress, and over reliance on caregivers, kind of the attached to the hip syndrome, as they say. I mean, when it comes to reducing that anxiety and that agitation, having a predictable routine or having structured daily activities can help with that anxiety, that agitation. This can look this can take on appearance of a lot of different things, from maybe it's a picture schedule for the day, maybe it's a calendar if they still have reading skills, a calendar that they can consult to look at or keep on their body to consult. Right? um, the difference between a schedule and a routine is a schedule dictates what time an activity or an event will occur, versus a routine is more of a order of events. So your schedule is going to say breakfast at 8, we take a shower at 8:30, we have coffee and news at 9, versus a routine is we're going to wake up, have breakfast, clean up, have coffee and news, and that might take 20 minutes, that might take 2 hours. It's just how the day goes on with how that patient's responding, moving, and accepting of the information. Right? But having something predictable helps. Right? When you the think about that individual, I a lot of times do not have the all of the support system that I'm used to having. Maybe my parents have moved on. I don't have the friends that I'm familiar with. I'm in a place that doesn't look like my home. There's a lot of people I don't know. I don't have a job. I'm not responsible for any housework. What am I supposed to do? Right. So helping them find meaning, giving meaning, having that routine can help them find meaning in their day to day. Right. Uh, Agitation is another very common behavior that we see often, and it can be verbal, it can be physical, it can be both. A lot of times there's a trigger behind it. We've talked about those before, but sometimes they're just not. This behavior has escalated out, up and up and up. Right? So first, we want to try those strategies that we've talked about, connecting with them, seeing if we can open up those lines of communication, something for us to work off of. Right? It may help to apologize in the situation, and do so if you think it'll help, even though you may not be in the wrong, you may not even know what you're apologizing for. Sometimes just knowing that somebody has apologized to you enough may be enough to back that behavior off enough to where they become receptive to your body language, your tone of voice, the activity we're trying to redirect to. Right? And continue through those steps, identifying physical needs, emotional needs. Above all else, ensure safety for the patient, for you, for anybody around. This can include removing potential hazards, whether they're tripping hazards, throwing hazards, weapons. I know in when I was in home health, there were a lot of conversations about that too. And we're not finding weapons in our medical facilities, but often we may find them in homes, or they technically have access to those weapons. So keep those in mind. We often encourage family members who are in the home with their loved ones to always have their phone on them, either in case of a medical need, or sometimes just a situation just gets so escalated that in order to ensure everybody's safety, law enforcement may need to be called in to help diffuse the situation. It can be helpful to caregivers, and I often encourage caregivers to create positive relationships when possible with their neighbors, or even with their first responders for their area, so that they are familiar with the situation. So if, heaven forbid, there is a time where a call needs to happen, that the first responders are already alerted. They know that the individual has impaired cognition, there may be impaired language skills, and that can help them know how best to approach and handle a situation in that time. Extremely rare, but it's best to be prepared for all situations that may or may not happen. All right. Repetition, we talked briefly about that the same question, same sentence, same story. It can even be the same behavior, turning the book page or flipping constantly through a TV channel, that sort of thing. Oftentimes it's more of a verbal nature. Then they find this one is more with our emotional needs, is where I see a lot of success happen first. So connecting with that person, opening up that communication, I know, and get a sense of how they're feeling. So this is looking beyond the words that they're saying and trying to understand, figure out the emotion behind what they're trying to tell you. Okay? And again, once you're able to figure that out, meet that need the best you can, and then redirect. Wandering occurs in about 60% of people with Alzheimer's disease, usually as the disease progresses in the much later stages. This one tends to have more physical unmet needs associated with it, compared to repetition, which tends to be more emotionally led. So with our wandering, think about, where are we trying to get to? Are they trying to find the bathroom and can't find it? Are they hungry or thirsty and don't know where to find food or drink? Or I've been sitting on this couch forever and I'm ready to do something, but I don't know what to do, and I don't go to work, and I'm looking for an activity. With wandering, it helps to, you can have visual signs if they're still readers or they're understanding pictures about where things are located. And they may not be able to tell you, I'm feeling hungry, feeling thirsty. We're just wandering. So you might have to really initiate this on your own and go through the list. You see them wandering. Well, let's lead them into the bathroom and try and go. Maybe that's it. No, that didn't work. Okay, well, let's head into the kitchen and here's something to drink, or here is a snack. See if that takes care of it. No? Okay, well then, kind of move down the list. That's why it helps to have all sorts of strategies or activities that are potentially ready to go, or avenues to explore to see what's the need that they're looking for. Maybe they're just wandering because they're ready for a nap and can't find the bedroom, or don't feel comfortable napping on the couch because it's too bright or too loud, or something. Right? And lastly, be flexible. That is, as a caregiver, that is what we're called to do so often every day, is be flexible. Consider the context that the behavior is occurring in. Ask yourself, if is the behavior truly harmful, or is it just annoying? So I had a family I enjoyed working with a while ago, who the husband had purchased a lot of greenery for his wife who had Alzheimer's, and she was an avid gardener but could no longer go out to the garden, couldn't go outside and participate in gardening. So he brought the greenery into her, and they were fake plants, so they were always green and always alive. But she loved to water those plants, and so she would water them multiple times a day. Did the plants need it? Nope. Did it create a mess on the floor? Yes. Did it provide meaning to that wife and help reduce the agitation and the wandering behaviors? Absolutely. So to the husband, he didn't mind cleaning up that spilled water underneath those plants a few times a day because it brought his wife happiness. It created a moment for them to talk about their garden and the flowers and the things and activities they used to do together. So that can help keep some context in mind when considering, is this a behavior that we actually need to do something about, or do we just allow this person is expressing themselves, trying to connect, and can just move on from it, versus we need to stop this behavior at all costs. We can't have this behavior happen again. Right? You can't change their behavior, but you can change how you respond to it. And I've learned that the more we try to control somebody's behavior, the more resistance we end up getting. So, you know, much you're going to have a lot more success acknowledging that person and validating whatever emotions that they're feeling at that point, recognizing them, and then trying to shift, maybe in a few degrees, change the activity slightly. If it's truly harmful, it's interfering, like, we really need to get to the doctor's appointment today. We've got to change some of this behavior to move on. We need to make this appointment. Those sort. Okay. And lastly, I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about free resources available to anybody from the Alzheimer's Association, whether you're living with the disease or caring for somebody with the disease. First off, we have our 24/7 hotline, the 800-272-3900. Any day or night, you can call if it's a simple question or something complex. They're going to be able to help you then and there, or they're going to be able to refer you to one of our dementia care consultants. A lot of them, it's with the side-by-side program here. where they're going to be able to provide you with that information you're looking for. Our dementia care consultants work one-on-one with individuals and families to create a individual and specific plan for managing the disease, helping to identify any community resources that may be available, or providing education at knowing what to expect at each stage of the disease. We're seeing more and more of our caregiver support groups pop up. Love seeing those. And like I said, that is a fantastic place for sharing your experiences, your feelings, getting your own validation. Being a caregiver is very, very tough. And it's helpful to express that and to have support from others who have also lived the experience of caring for somebody with Alzheimer's, and having a place to bounce ideas or receive new ideas on how to better care for a loved one. Our memory cafe was geared towards individuals who have Alzheimer's and creating a safe place for them to socialize and share their own experiences the best they can. With COVID, those are still on hold at this point, to my knowledge. And we have community education programs, much like this one that we're still have going on. They're still mostly virtual, but we are seeing some in-persons pop up. Great place to learn more ways about understanding Alzheimer's and dementia, strategies to minimizing your risk, to understanding behaviors, and just strategies for caregiving overall. Trial match, I'm going to talk about a little more on the next slide. And then lastly, we have our website, which is always available and has its own support group, chat boards to there. So if you're not somebody who wants to meet in a group setting, but you still want help, support, and resources, the online support group, the chat may be a place for you to find that information that you're looking for. Okay. And there's ways that we can all get involved with helping with the Alzheimer's Association. Our biggest, most recognized event is the Walk to End Alzheimer's. That'll be happening in this fall. So I'm sure there'll be more details and information coming out here over the summer months. We have the longest day coming up next month. That happens on the summer solstice, so June 21. It's an opportunity for everybody to use their skills, their habits, their hobbies, their gifts to help raise funds and awareness for the Alzheimer's Association. And those funds are used for research, for education support programs, caregiver patient support. Okay. We have opportunities for Alzheimer's Trial Match. So this is a unique program available to anybody, whether you have Alzheimer's disease or not. And what the program does is it matches you up with a study where you fit the criteria or your interest for, and you get to help participate in the research for better understanding the disease and to find a cure for the disease. So that's pretty cool. Like, you can help be a part of the cure. It's awesome. We have volunteer opportunities within the organization, much like being a community educator. And finally, you can be an advocate. You can write to our representatives. You can help spread the word about how we need greater patient, person, and caregiver support for managing this disease and to help finding a cure for it, because there's a lot of burden, there's a lot of cost, there's a lot of lost quality of life with this disease. And if we can minimize that, we're all going to benefit from it in the long run.